I have come back from this time I've had, where I have been really held and welcomed, and by a more than human world, by the living world, and I've received all kinds of gifts and intelligence and insight and care from all kinds of creatures and beings and energies, and dare I say it, spirits. I have experienced, again, what I have always known, what I've always felt in my heart, in my body, of the intelligence of this world, this living world that we're part of, and just how unbelievably restricted and shallow our sense of modern reality is, and how limiting it is, and how destructive it is to our souls.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. So a deep relationship with this mysterious system, along with spontaneous cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us thriving and the spaceship flying. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Greetings, Earthling. This is Dan. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is a slightly different episode. I am currently sitting in the woods near my home. It's an ancient woodland that I love to come to often. And this episode will just be me. There are no guests. I shall be rambling in the woods, metaphorically. I'm actually sitting with my back against a birch tree, and in amongst a lot of beech, actually, and some ash. When I started the podcast in 2018, I would often come to the woods and have a little cheeky rambling episode, sort of spontaneous reflections from the woods. And yeah, so there's a few episodes back in the real early days, but that was something I was doing a bit more regularly. But I wanted to come to the woods today and record this as a way of sort of marking some endings of things. And yeah, I've been exploring endings a lot in the last year or so, or how to pay attention is probably a better way of saying it. How to pay attention to endings. And I feel this episode really is a way for me to, mark the context that I find myself in coming towards the end of July 2023. I I feel there's a sort of ending of this phase of the podcast this year, the types of episodes I've been recording, and how they've been emerging, because it has been a very emergent year. But I feel like there's a sort of ending of these episodes that I've been recording, and I am attempting to create some stillness in August and some time with my family. So I'm not going to be recording anything. And I'm shaping up some ideas for a new season of the podcast to start recording in the autumn, which will be a little bit different. I also would like to reflect actually a little bit on the conversations I have had this year on the podcast. And what those conversations, some of the things that have come up in those conversations, how I've been carrying some of those threads from the guests that I've been chatting with, why I think they might be useful threads to explore in this moment in time that we find ourselves in. So I'd like to talk about those. And in some ways, this episode is also a opportunity for me to try and speak from the heart, to try and really speak more through my heart intelligence, which is something that I am really interested in tuning into and working from now more and more as things unravel more and more in the constructed reality. So if you're new to the podcast, welcome. This might be a slightly different to what you were expecting. If you are a regular listener, then again, I hope you might find something in this heart-centered ramble in the woods that I'm going to that I'm recording here. And likewise, it's fine if this stuff doesn't connect with you. I'm actually really doing this for me. Because ultimately, why not? It's my podcast. I'm doing this because, I want to honour some shifts that are going on for me. So paying attention to that and to these conversations over the last year, and also recognising what I recognise as I record these conversations, put them out and move on. And I realise when I go back to them, or people reach out and they tell me about something, that they really, they've really connected with in a conversation. And I realise that there's a lot of fertiliser in these conversations, and insight. And so, I wanted to just sort of, I think sometimes, I quite like to do a bit more of that after the conversations I've been having, to sort of pull out the threads. But often when you do these things on your own, with very little resource, you just keep moving with them. So I wanted to sort of pull out some of the things that I feel have been quite that have stood out for me in some of these conversations, and particularly things that I think might be quite useful in these times we are in. So there you go. That's about 8 minutes I've been rambling about what this is all about, and I haven't really gone anywhere yet. So I want to give a little bit of context of not of where I am, because I'm told you I'm in this wood. It's very nice that the sun is just dappling through these very, very beautiful leafy vibes onto the forest floor where I'm sat with a lot of decaying leaves and wood and twigs and moss and branches and I have this July spent a lot of time sitting in a more than human context, more than human environments, a lot more than I usually do, and actually for a lot of July I've had a real, nearly sort of 3 weeks, which is very rare for me. That I really sort of quite spontaneously and serendipitously, I think that's how you say it, some opportunities came up for me to do some deeper learning on myself, which I have been really seeking for some time. Some space to really sort of stop and pause and tune in to what is going on within me, around me, and where and how I am showing up and how I'm using my energy and voice in these times. And 2 things came up which I'm going to tell you a little bit about because they're relevant to, well, they are very relevant, and they're very relevant to this podcast and where it's heading and to the work that I do in the world and to this time I find myself in. So 2 things came up. The first thing that came up was an opportunity to do a vision quest. Now, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but a vision quest is a rites of passage, really. The quest that I took part in was informed quite heavily by some Native American traditions, but essentially I went away for 10 days, and of those 10 days I spent 4 days and 4 nights out. I don't like calling it in nature because we are nature, but out in let's say a more than human context, a wild environment. It was actually sort of between a forest and some meadows at the foot of some mountains in North Wales. And I spent 4 days and 4 nights on my own, fasting with no food, no technology, with a tarp and a bivvy bag. And it's something I've been trying to do for some years, and every time the opportunities come up, something has happened which hasn't enabled me to leave home and do the time to do it. Anyway, the opportunity came up, and you spend a couple of days prepping, and then you do the quest, and you come back and you do a couple of days of integration and work. And I'm not going to tell you about what happened, because in this particular approach, we were advised to hold on to our story of what happened to us during those 4 days, 4 nights for a year, and let it all cook before we share. But I can tell you a little bit about some of the context of it. So I did that, and then I came back, and obviously when I was planning to do this, an opportunity came up to go and do this quest. Just a bit before, I had come across a thing called Kincentric Leadership. Now, I would unpack that. In my words, kincentric leadership would mean this idea that we are part of a wide web of life, human and more than human. And to be kincentric is to strive to be in relationship with all of that life, to put all of that life, to view all life as sentient. Everything has an aliveness, has soul, is animate, let's say. So the human sort of supremacy is dissolved. We put ourselves into this idea of a much more mysterious realm of reality. So how do we put our relationship to all life at the center of how we go about evolving, leading, organizing, designing in this world? I came across this this invitation to become part of a Kincentric Leadership co-learning process over 18 months, which was being convened by two amazing humans, Justine and Anna. And so I applied. I thought I'm doing a lot of sort of guiding and holding and in my work, and every few years I try and deepen my own learning so that I'm also able to resource myself and be in community of other sort of learners that are holding and guiding, and I can bring that back into my work. So I applied for this place, and I was offered a place, and it's an 18-month journey. And the journey, it's 80 people from around the world. And it starts with a week-long retreat, 2 in Europe, 1 in the US, 1 in Asia. And I was granted a place in one of the retreats in Europe, which happened to be in Devon. And the retreat was themed listening with the more than human world, 7 days. So I came off the Vision Quest, I went home for 2 days, I saw my family, and then I went on this, headed off down to Devon and embarked on this week-long retreat on Kincentric Leadership, and a whole load of stuff going on in that, which again, I'm not going to speak to fully, but it was profound, and yeah. And so again, a lot of time exploring a deeper form of listening, how we can sort of listen to the world around us in ways beyond just our ears, like how can we tap into a much more complex level of intelligence and knowing the world and knowing life around us and our place within it all. So that also involves spending a lot of time communing with plants and beings and animals and trees and rivers, and so I've had this kind of like this big chunk of July that has been that has involved in many ways being in communion with a more than human world. I've had less human interaction than I've had for a long time, and I've learnt so much about myself, about the world around me. I've managed to process a lot of stuff that's been quite difficult, and stuff that I've been carrying for a long time that is not been serving me so well and those around me. And I have experienced, again, what I have always known, what I've always felt in my heart, in my body, of the intelligence of this world, this living world that we're a part of, and just how unbelievably restricted and shallow our sense of modern reality is, and how limiting it is, and how destructive it is to our souls. Yeah. I have come back from this time that I've had, where I have been really held and welcomed, and by a more than human world, by the living world, and I've received all kinds of gifts and intelligence and insight and care from all kinds of creatures and beings and energies, and dare I say it, spirits. And I feel like I've kind of always felt that, but the culture that I have been brought up in and programmed in, obviously, really runs away from any of that. But actually, the more you start to look at seeing the world as a seeing the world as alive, seeing everything as alive, the more you realise that, pretty much for 90 odd, I don't know what it is, but most of our existence as a human species, we've always seen the world that way. In every culture, in every tradition, in every part of this planet, we've always seen the world as mysterious, sentient, alive. It's only really in the last, in deep time, the last few hundred years, which is a sort of cosmic wing flap, that we've limited the world to this kind of, rational, logical, empirical, controlling view of head-centered sense of what is real. So we've been living in this kind of much more one-dimensional, I would argue, reality for a tiny amount of time, tiny amount of our existence. So, yeah, it's just been it's really interesting for me, because when you look out now into this moment, as I have been slowly doing as I've returned back from the into the sort of constructed human-centered world, we're kind of living in sort of peak Don't Look Up. I don't know if you've seen the film Don't Look Up, but it feels like that's what we're living in, sort of peak Don't Look Up, where it's just so surreal when you look into what is, if you look into, say, inverted commas, mainstream reality, consensus reality, what politics and media and corporate culture tells us of how to live. It's bordering on, as far as I can tell, it's just insanity, right? Because the living world is unravelling at speed. We see it manifested in all of these extreme climate events that are happening, now on Western doorsteps everywhere. And yet the discourse in the sort of the power structures and the media and stuff just still tells us to ignore it, or to deny it, or to keep economically growing our way out of it. And it's just this sort of it's this bizarre. I mean, it's so uncomfortable. I find it it's so surreal. And I'm often wondering, surely more people are starting to question this.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
It seems to me that, media and corporate culture and politics are so far behind the curve of what people are actually experiencing and witnessing. The dialogue of stuff is just so... Well, it just feels pathological most of the time. That's how I see it anyway. Maybe that's just me. So... But it's really tough. I don't know what it's like for you. I find it really difficult, particularly how to speak to this time in my everyday. As a father, as a partner, as a friend, neighbours, it's still, I find, very difficult to speak from the heart. Speak from the heart about what is happening, to just speak to the mess of it all, the sadness of it all, because the head wants to, the words come up into the brain, and they want to sort of, the thing to make sense of it, because that's the only way, really, I'm seeing that this modern culture, the only real sense it tries to go to is the making sense bit. It has to try and make sense of it all. Can't compute that, this reality might be falling apart. And of course, as I sit here in the wood and I'm looking at the falling apart that's happening, the decay and and the breakdown that's happening, all around me as life is happening. There's growth and there's decay, there is composting, there is new life emerging and life breaking down. There are trees dying and leaning on other trees that are growing into the heights of the wood. There is this kind of community of life of the collapse of old and the emerging of new, and there is no kind of hiding or denying of that reality. It's just how life works, and there is actually real beauty in all of that aliveness. But I look out and I think sometimes, like, I don't want to get into the science, because I trust the science. I trust the scientists, what they're saying. And I know that, many scientists are heads in their hands. And there's a lot of talk at the moment about this, the intensity of change. That, all the predictions are coming true. Everything is playing out exactly as been predicted, but the intensity of the climatic shifts, of what's happening in the ocean, of fires, of winds, of floods, the intensity is surprising scientists greatly. And of course, we've put so much energy into the atmosphere. We're burning so much energy that sits under our, inverted commas, normal way of life, our way of life, this kind of whole civilization that's just built on speed and extraction and materials and energy and more and more and more and more and more. The energy that goes into the atmosphere to sustain that story of more is so insanely extreme that it's accelerating the intensity of the breakdown. And of course, all of the more than human world, all of these ecosystems, all of this biodiversity, I don't like using these words either, because they sort of, again, other everything, but that have become the materials, for this civilization, for this culture. Everything we desire has come from the earth. It's been extracted somehow. It's been built on extraction and death of materials and creatures and beings, and it's been put through the hands of humans who are suffering and being exploited to create these sense of beauty and modernity and progress. It's not just a story of carbon, it's a story of more. All of this stuff is interconnected, and so this stuff is playing out. It's playing out everywhere. And the paradox, the tension of that, of how to hold some joy, and how to hold that, and how to hold the possibility, which, again, I see so much possibility going on the ground. But it's overwhelming at times to see where the meaningful shifts will come from. And yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about grief, and hopelessness, and there was on the Kincentric retreat that I went on, we had an amazing guest who joined us on one of the days, Chokasin Ghost Horse, who is a Lakota. I'm not sure he'd like me to use the word elder, but let's say a wise older man. he said a lot. He said, we need hopelessness to do what is required. We need hopelessness to do what is required. The heart is not hoping. It does what is required for life. That really landed in me, and I wanted to just talk a bit about grief, and I can see that grief is being spoken to a lot. There was some great posts. I saw something this week. I can't remember who said it, but something like, grief is the way through, or something like that. And I think this comes to the whole endings and decaying and rotting and composting. And it seemed to me, at least, a kind of just a fear of grief. But it's like, my experience with grief is, it's another sort of integral part of being alive. Like, it's an expression of love, grief. So when you don't allow yourself to grieve, whether that's for loss, right? So grief, we could say grief is loss. Now, that can be a loss of life, of someone dear to us, but it can be a loss, at the moment, what I think the grief that a lot of us are experiencing and carrying is that, there's a loss of so much. There's a loss of the more than human world, of other species and other beings that are, that are rapidly disappearing. A breakdown of these beautiful places and ecosystems, and there's the loss of identities, of stories, of futures that we thought we might have. And obviously this brings up lots of fear for people as well, and lots of anger. And I think a lot of this anger and violence and fear and everything, I think so much of it is entangled with grief, and an inability to grieve, an inability to really face into the love and the loss of that love that we have in us and what we're experiencing. So what does that look like when we suppress our ability to express our love? Our love for life. We are not able to face into it, to allow it to move through us. What's that doing? And my own little tiny experience of all of this is that what I'm witnessing when I'm working with my own grief, and both, as we say in the Becoming Crew work, working in community, involving ourselves in community, and that may well be a community of other fellow humans, but it's also the community, the more than human community, when how to open ourselves up to this more than human world and to grieve. There's a lot of power and possibility through that when we open ourselves up to others, when we witness others in their grief and their loss. And it's an expression of love. That's where I keep coming back to. It's an expression of love, and we're suppressing that, and that's manifesting through confusion and fear and anger and violence. And so grief becomes a vital thing to work with. And again, what I'm experiencing in my own life and in the communities of practice that I'm working with, that possibility comes through grief. It doesn't say that pain goes away, but when we work with grief and we witness it and we acknowledge it for what it is, which is a vital part of being human, it's a vital part of the pattern and rhythm of life. To let go, to witness our pain and the love, back to the love, our love for life. A love for life. for all beings, for each other. When we make space for that, when we don't shy away from it, when we support each other to express that grief, to move through it, to witness each other, then we can move through. We can move through to new ways of being, new ways of relating to ourselves, to each other, to this more than human world. And that's where the seeds of new cultures, of life-sustaining cultures, come. You know, there's a lot of talk about regeneration and regenerative, and what I see a lot is a lot of wanting to jump into the new of it all, you know, the birthing the new, and growing. But we have to tend to the dying, to the ending, to the breaking down, to the decaying, to the composting. We need to prepare the soil for new beginnings, because we cannot create the conditions for strong roots, for strong life-sustaining cultures to really take root. We've got to pay attention to sitting with the mess of these times, you know, and end things well. Through that comes possibility, comes less fear, comes an opening up and a letting go. It's a natural cycle. Birth, death, renewal, like this wood, birth and death. I feel personally there is no other way. I've spent nearly 2 decades of my working life being more in that sort of mode of what I would call, you know, communicating the need for change, you know, campaigns, mobilizing, trying to sort of thinking, well, if you can just, you know, if we just talk about this stuff more, if people understand more what's going on, then things will shift. And I think for many, many years, I've kind of known, again, in my heart, it's never going to work, because we have to feel our way through this. We can't just talk about it or think it. We have to feel our way through it. And while talking and communicating is useful and necessary, it doesn't, it's limited. It's limited, keeps us locked in a way of being, in a way of relating that is disconnected, really. So I sort of feel that, where am I going with this? We're all needed. I think we're in a time now where our attention to what is going on is so needed. You know, it's very easy in this culture just to, you know, we're so distracted, you know, and it's not really our fault half the time. And we're sort of plugged into these systems that just grab our attention. But we need our attention now. We need our attention. We need to become aware of where we're putting our attention and what we're not seeing or listening to. Yeah, our collective attention. Our participation. It's what we talk about in the spirit of becoming crew, of participating, of stepping into service, of serving life now, of finding our unique place in this vast web of intelligent life, and what is being called for in these times, in the great unravelling, as Joanna Macy said, and the great turning, moving towards life-sustaining cultures. We are needed. Like, this is not going to happen without more and more of us stepping in. You know, the political structures and systems I can speak to in this country, then this is not coming from the top down. This is not coming from the top down. And we can't wait. These systems are so far off the curve of where I think more people are finding themselves, but also where we need to move. We don't know what will emerge, what kind of political systems will emerge from this great unravelling, this decaying, but what we do know is that people need to be at the centre of them. And that will come by more of us stepping in, starting to create these new realities with life at the centre and the places where we live. There's so much to do, you know. I mean, on the grief thing, how might we help more people step into that, start to process this great loss of love, this pain that we need to work with in order to seed new possibilities. How do we work with our young? How do we work with, there's so many of us that are going to need support networks, encouragement, new behaviours, new ways of relating. And of course there are many, many brilliant things going on all around. You know, these things are happening, these practices are happening, but we need more of us to connect with them and bring them into our own lives. We've got exponential shifts in climate coming, right? We're seeing this intensity now. So there's this unpredictability of tipping points. You know, this civilization, this modernity was built on predictable weather and floods and floods of fossil fuels. You know, we've been sort of inebriated on fossil fuels, and we have to design new cultures with neither of those things, right? We've got to create new cultures with unpredictable weather and climate, which, you know, when you think of food, just consider that. We've built food systems on predictable weather, and now we're having to somehow build resilient food systems with extreme weather and unpredictability. So it means we're going to have to get really comfortable with uncertainty. If we understood that we're living in this age of, you know, massively unpredictable extreme climate, and where we had to be incredibly mindful of energy use, particularly fossil fuel energy, you just wouldn't be designing systems like our current economic systems. I mean, it'd just be insanity. If you go with those are the conditions, you just would not be pursuing these systems that our politicians and corporations and media keep wanting to head into the future with. I mean, a child, if you showed a child that, if you said, look, here we go, this is the context that we're in, massively unpredictable climate for the foreseeable future, and a need to really, really be very mindful about the burning of any fossil fuels, and very particular how we use it. What's the economic system that we would build? And you know, children would tell you, well, not this one. I mean, it's that level of insanity that we are, you know, just sort of unhinged from reality, that our leaders seem to be rooted in. You've got to build cooperative, community-led, connected, diverse ways of living. You need to put the well-being of all life at the centre.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
I mean, it's a collective hallucination, some kind of pathological madness called progress, to keep going with these insane, extractive, destructive ways of being. And I think where I've got to again in this month and this year, and the work I've been doing with the stories work, with the remix, which has just finished. It's a 3-month learning journey we've just been on, looking at stories in our culture at a relational level, how stories determine, you know, the structures and systems and the ways of life. But actually, stories are informed by their relational, the ways we relate to the earth, the ways we relate to each other, the ways we relate to ourselves. They inform the kind of stories that we carry. And, you know, this breakdown is a breakdown in our understanding of life, of our deep interdependence, of the fact that we are relational beings in relation with all manner of life. This massive disconnection from our modern human world, which supports human life, everything we do. We've got to put our relationship with life back at the centre. So yeah, that was quite a long ramble, wasn't it? I don't know if you were there with me. It felt good just to sort of talk about that stuff. So, thinking about the podcast, the podcast this year, as I say, I was life did its thing and meant that there was less. I recorded less conversations this year to date, and that's fine. But I wanted just to talk about a couple of learnings from some of the episodes this year. So there was an episode with Fergal Smith, the regenerative farmer, surfer from the west of Ireland. And there was a thing that's I think one of the big takeouts of the conversation with Fergal, which I think is really relevant for this moment, is this idea of inputs. He talks constantly of this, striving to minimizing inputs, this kind of way of thinking about farming in this regenerative mindset, which is kind of like, how much stuff am I bringing onto this land in order to farm it, and that might be, for him it would be, what am I bringing on? Am I bringing on feed for animals? Am I bringing on fuel for machinery? Am I bringing on chemicals and pesticide? What things am I bringing on? Compost and what inputs are required here? And this idea of inputs, and actually this idea of like, is it possible to get to a point where you're literally, or even to a point where you have no inputs, where the land itself is generating everything it needs for life to coexist in a healthy way. And that's a really interesting analogy for us to think about at this time as modern humans living in this modern civilization. If you think about it, like, what are the inputs required to sustain this way of life? Once you start to think of that, you start to think of like a business. What is it that a business is taking as inputs to do what it does? What does it take to be to live? What kind of inputs are we seeking on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to live our lives? What does the culture what's the culture communicating to us? What's it asking of us in terms of the inputs that we should be seeking to exist? And once you start looking at it, it's so insanely extreme. And again, you start to understand why this story of modernity is mad. It's insane. It's just a story of more. But everything is about maximizing. Everything is about more. That's what the culture and the society and the systems are designed to try and encourage us to do, to seek more inputs. It's a really interesting thought experiment to think about the inputs that you... And again, I'm not stripping this down to the individual or blaming the individual, because the system is based on, extreme input culture. But it's a good thought experiment as well, thinking about what are the inputs that you are having to bring into your life on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis to sustain yourself. So, yeah, thanks for that one, Fergal. Inputs. It's a good one for us to think. What's your inputs? Then there was Love Sega, who I've really enjoyed chatting with. Is a musician, an artist from South London. And I think there's lots of things Sega does. He's a very inspirational human being. But one of the things I really took out from the conversation with him was this idea of how he's bringing kind of artistry into really complex social and ecological contexts. He's been digging into knotty stuff like toxic air pollution in cities and how it impacts, marginalised communities, people of colour, and thinking of how to, it's a political thing. I mean, it's going on right now at the moment in this country, and kicking off with how entitled some folks are about their ability to drive their cars around, polluting the air for the younger generations. But Sega sort of bringing this artistry into these complex situations, these political situations, and it made me think again about this. One is where we say in Becoming Crew, this idea of what does it mean to practice a profession? How do I bring this crew mentality? How do I participate in the bringing life back to the whole, not just my own individual success, but how can I, through my work, seek to bring some healing, bring something to the whole, to serve life through some of that. And that's what Sega's doing with his work. But it makes me think again, this time of, we desperately need more artists and culture to really step in right now, not just to halt the destruction of our living world, but to begin to reimagine, help people reimagine and create these new life-sustaining cultures. Politics needs art and culture and ecology, and more than human perspectives, as well as real people in real places. That's got to be a part of a new way of being. When we bring these elements together, we start to imagine a different type of politics that can be quite exciting. That's what one of my big takeouts with Sega was. There was Dougal Hine, who talked about his book At Work in the Ruins. He's a really extraordinary thinker, and there was a lot in the conversation from Dougal. Again, he spoke a lot to endings. He also talked about this idea of what is it that we want to, again, sort of paying attention to a lot of the stuff that we have been told is essential for life. What is that? What do you actually want to keep from this modernity culture? What is actually worth holding on to? And what is worth letting go of? And also maybe looking back to some of the things that we've dismissed. What do we want to take back from the past that we just sort of gave up because we were told it's just, it's not part of the story of progress? So this idea of what is worth holding on to? What might we want to reclaim? That really landed. Again, I think about my 4 days and 4 nights in the woods, and I received so much. I had no food, I had no technology. I learned a lot about myself that I haven't learned in a long, long time. I received a lot from all kinds of beings. I'm not saying it was all fun and games. It was quite challenging. But I guess what I'm saying is that, there's a lot more going on out there. There are a lot of other things going on that we're not quite aware of, but that we can be aware of, because we could all tune in. It's all possible. We can tune into this more magical world. We don't need a lot of this shit we're being told we need, honestly. Anyway, that's just my little thought there. Then there was Paul Powsland, the lawyer, who is a river guardian and a protector of trees, and all round just this most extraordinary human being. And he's using his legal profession and his talent to try and make changes from within, as well as to try and look at how his profession is, the role it plays in upholding destructive, divisive, extractive systems and behaviours, and trying to find ways to speak to that, as well as, then just being this extraordinary crew member on Spaceship Earth who's just, guarding the river roading and supporting and helping communities protect trees and all kinds of stuff, and really just bringing that sacredness spirit back. So yeah, for Paul, for me, it's like this idea of like, you know, there are many of us in professions, and what does it mean to be in a profession at a time where the world is unravelling, where the climate is breaking down, where we desperately need more people to step in and serve life. And I think Paul invites us, more of us, to consider our profession and think, well, what can I be doing? What could my profession be doing here to halt the destruction, to accelerate these shifts to a culture that puts life at the centre, that understands that life is sacred. That's what I take out from Paul. And he had this lovely piece on sort of becoming indigenous, and this idea of like, you know, talking about these islands in Britain, for example, where he is and where I am and many of us are, but that it's not about where you're from, but it's about, do you love the place you're in? Do you love it? Do you protect it? Do you want to steward it and guardianship it? Do you love it? And that this idea of indigeneity, maybe it's a verb, not a noun. And I love that. And a completely different form of what it is to be, of patriotism, is actually to be a lover of life, of the lands and the rivers and the creatures and the beings and the communities and the places, and to really, really start to serve that, to step into that mode of being. So thank you, Paul, for that. Bayo Akamalafe. Wow, well, Bayo has been someone who has made so much impact to me since I discovered his work, and I was really chuffed when he came and had a conversation with me on the podcast this year. And he also joined us on the remix as one of our special guests, and yeah, just I mean, he again, just this extraordinary mind and a generosity and just a beautiful way of being, and he just gives so much. But yeah, he talked about the ant death spiral of modernity. This idea that we're just locked, we're trapped in this death spiral, like ants become. They get stuck and they just go round and round and round and round and round until they just, you know, die. And he sort of used that as kind of metaphor for the stuckness that we're in this sort of modern culture. It just doesn't seem to matter what we're told is happening or what we can see is happening. We just keep going. We're stuck. This pheromone trail that keeps us locked onto the highway of destruction. And that, you know, we're being called and invited to travel into the cracks that are appearing around us. What does that look like to form different type of politics around the cracks and the darker, weirder places that we might be being drawn to? And, you know, he also articulated really beautifully this relational crisis that we're in. You know, the climate crisis is a relational crisis. It's due to a way of relating to the world. And he talked about the need to repair, as in to pair again, to find new relationships, to relate in new ways with new bodies, moving towards the practice or the stepping into the bewilderment of these times. Cracks and bewilderment. What does it mean what would it mean if we moved into that? What might emerge? He also said a lot of other really amazing stuff that I can't remember, but thank you, Bayo. Then there was Eski Britton, who I'm a huge fan of. She's been on the pod. That's the third time Eski's been on the podcast, and she was talking about her new book, Ebb and Flow. And I think, particularly, in the conversation, but also in the book, Eski's very much, I think, drawing our attention towards the ebb that these times to move away again from the sort of the manic kind of like looking for flow all the time. The sort of, again, the sort of high, the up, the light of flow, but moving into the slowing down, the breaking down, the dark of ebb, the grief. And that is essential. It's an essential part of life. Without embracing and stepping into and immersing ourselves and, being attentive to the grief, the breakdown, the decay, the slowing down, that we cannot cultivate the capacity for life. They're both needed. And also about bringing this kind of sacred practice and these kind of sacred stories back to life in the waters around us. And that, we might see all of this devastation and this pollution in the wild waters of the earth now and the ocean, and that can be overwhelming. It exists. But what about now if we decide to step into this new relationships with water within us and around us, and we begin to bring this sacredness back that was always there, was always there in for the massive majority of humans' existence on this earth. We've had a sacred relation to water, but again, in the kind of cosmic wing flap of the last few hundred years of industrialism and the separation story and colonialism and capitalism and neoliberalism and all the isms, we've suddenly just destroyed that sacred relationship. But actually, we're talking about a few minutes in Earth time. So maybe we can step into this idea of being deep time beings now, and this is our time to start to bring that sacredness back to the waters around us. And he's invited us to even say, where is your water? Where is your water? Do you know that water near you? Maybe it's a pond, maybe it's a stream, maybe it's a river, maybe it's a coastline. But finding that water again, and starting to build that relationship with it. So yeah, there's going to be a load more conversations and episodes from the podcast coming in the autumn as I get going again. And also I am working on, and I hope to start recording in the autumn, a really special mini-series which is going to be exploring radical kinship with all life, featuring guests and experiences that can help us widen our consciousness and connection with all life, that can support how we might move back as collectives and communities into relationship with this animate, sentient, mysterious, creative, diverse living world beyond just the modern human reality and all the possibilities that might open up to us. To live more from the heart intelligence with more awe and connection, and how that might help us move through these unravelling times in greater community and in cooperation with all life. So that's the podcast updates. And thank you to all my guests and contributors and all the folks that help me make and create this podcast, and for all of you who listen to it. So yeah, here's the thing. What if the antidote to all the fear and breakdown is to let go of the spell of individualism, of the separate self? You are not alone. You never have been. You have more non-human bacteria in your body than human bacteria, for starters. We are, each of us, a diverse melting vessel of interspecies becoming. The world we have not made is ready to offer us so much if we also are ready to give and to receive, to move into a practice of reciprocity. We can decide with intention to move into a more beautiful, expansive relationship with a vast community of life, human and more than human. And this way of being, of relating, is informing everything we are doing with Becoming Crew. These experiences that help us evolve ourselves together in community, in crews of fellow humans and more than humans. And we'll be offering new unlearning adventures in the autumn. The community solo will be back. What's Yours to Do for teams in business and organizations is ready to go. And the Remix 2024 will also be announced. And you can check all of that out either off the spaceship.earth website or just go direct to becomingcrew.com/adventures. So, with that, as the wind picks up, I've been tuning into the wind a lot of late. The wind is definitely becoming kin. So with that, I hope you're able to get some rest in the coming month and ready yourself for stepping into service in the autumn. We are all so needed for the sake of this earth, of our future ancestors and all living beings. So thank you for listening and for your support. Do reach out with anything that's come up for you, any questions, thoughts, feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So with that, remember to look after yourself, to connect with those around you, and to keep entangling yourself with your more than human family in the places you call home. Until next time, peace and out.
If you've appreciated listening to this podcast, would you consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a rating or review via your podcast provider? It helps more people to find us and we'd be most grateful. This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles;